They say a man can outrun anything except the echo of his own heartbeat. I used to believe that too. That silence could bury memory, that money could bleach blood from my hands. But the night I stood by the sea, watching the rain fall like glass shards through the wind, I understood the truth. There is no hiding from the sound of what you've done. The city was quiet behind me. Naples, sleeping in the distance like a sinner's prayer. The tide reached my shoes, black leather bleeding into salt. I could still feel her perfume, faint and haunting, like something that refused to die. Maybe that's why I came back here, to the place where it all ended and began. I built an empire on the promise that I would never need love. It was supposed to make me untouchable, a fortress made of fear. But power is just another kind of loneliness, and I learned that too late. Every man I buried took a piece of me with him, until I became a mosaic of ghosts. I'm not here to ask for forgiveness. I'm here to remember her, Elena, the woman I destroyed everything for, the one who taught me what it meant to kill out of love, and what it meant to die for forgiveness. Some nights I wonder if God keeps a ledger, if he counts the times we tried to be good against the times we failed. If he does, I hope he sees the moment I chose her over the world I'd built. That was the only honest thing I ever did. The rain keeps falling, and as I speak these words into the dark, I realize this isn't a confession. It's a requiem for her, for me, for the boy I used to be before love taught me the price of being human. The morning after rain always smells like memory. It softens the edges of the world, the same way time dulls guilt. Not erasing it, just making it quiet enough to live with. From my balcony, the coast stretched out in cold light. The sea below my mansion was a mirror of gray steel, moving with a kind of restrained fury. Waves broke against the black rocks like they wanted to climb out, to escape. I understood that feeling. My name, Adrian Vale, meant something in this city. People whispered it in corners, behind closed doors, like a spell that might summon danger. In the streets of Naples, respect is a currency more expensive than gold. Fear buys silence. Silence builds kingdoms. I inherited neither wealth nor mercy. Everything I owned was bought with control, the kind that breaks bones and bends loyalty. I didn't believe in loyalty, not really. I believed in leverage. You learn early in my world that affection is a weapon people use before they betray you, so I built a life without it. The mansion was built into the cliffs, a cathedral of glass and concrete, a cage made beautiful. Inside, the air was always cold. Expensive art on the walls, imported marble floors that echoed when I walked. Every sound in that house returned to me, slightly delayed, as if even the walls hesitated before answering. Luca was the only one who entered without knocking. He'd been with me since the beginning, a friend once, a soldier now. There's a kind of bond men like us share. Not love, but something shaped by fire and fear. He spoke little, moved like smoke, and understood me without words. That morning, he brought the report. Another shipment secured, another rival cornered into debt. Business as usual, but the more successful we became, the less alive I felt. At night, I used to walk the corridors alone, my footsteps echoing down the long marble hall. Sometimes I'd stop by the window that overlooked the sea. I'd take out the silver rosary my mother left me, the only thing in my life not bought or stolen. The metal was cold, the beads smooth from years of holding them too tightly. She used to tell me that every man is born with a garden inside him. Love, hope, goodness. And that sin is what happens when we stop tending it. I used to laugh at her words. Then she died, and I built a garden of graves instead. In my world, people confuse stillness for strength. They look at a man who doesn't flinch, who doesn't weep, and they call him powerful. But power is nothing more than the ability to hide your fear longer than the next man. There were nights when I'd wake up to the sound of the sea clawing at the cliffs, like it was calling me back. I'd think about the faces of those who'd fallen because of me, men who'd believed in me, women who'd begged for mercy. I'd see them in dreams, their eyes open, waiting for an answer I never had. But daylight erased those thoughts. Business doesn't wait for redemption. Meetings with politicians, accountants, and lieutenants filled my days. I wore suits that cost more than the houses I'd burned down. People called me signore, kissed my ring, and spoke with trembling respect. Yet no one saw how empty it all was. The empire I'd built was made of shadows, contracts signed in blood, trust bought with fear. I'd convinced myself that control was a kind of peace, but silence isn't peace. Silence is what's left when every voice that could have saved you is gone. One afternoon, I found myself standing before the ocean again, glass of whiskey in hand, watching the tide pull the light out of the day. The sky was the color of old wounds, bruised, fading, unresolved. I remember thinking how strange it was that I could command hundreds of men, own fleets of cars, dictate the fate of families. Yet not a single thing in my life felt real. I didn't know it then, but that emptiness was the beginning of my undoing. Because life has a cruel way of filling silence, and when it does, it rarely fills it with mercy. It started small, a meeting request from one of the southern families. A truce, they said, a chance to unite the coast under one alliance. They sent a letter sealed with the Marcelli crest. That name alone carried history, and the scent of old blood. My father had hated the Marcellis. Rival families divided by land, by pride, by the body count left behind. Their leader, Don Marcelli, was an old viper dressed like a saint. He preached loyalty and forgiveness, but his hands were as red as mine. Still, business was business. I agreed to the meeting. It was held at a vineyard 2 hours outside the city. Golden fields, sun-drunk air, laughter from people who didn't know what death smelled like. Don Marcelli greeted me with a smile too kind for the life he led. Behind him stood a woman in a white dress, carrying a tray of wine glasses. That was the first time I saw her, Elena. She wasn't meant to be part of this world. I could tell by the way she held herself, light but steady, like someone who had learned to live softly in a house built on violence. Her eyes didn't flinch when she looked at me. They searched. For a moment I felt the earth tilt. Not in the way of love, not yet, but in the way of recognition. As if some part of me had been waiting for her long before I knew her name. I remember the way the wind lifted her hair, carrying it across her face, sunlight tangled in the strands. She smiled, not at me but at something beyond me, something I couldn't see. And in that small, ordinary second, my empire began to crack. The day after that meeting at the vineyard, I couldn't shake her from my thoughts. I'd faced death more times than I could count and walked away untouched. But a single glance from Elena Marcelli had left me wounded in ways I couldn't name. It wasn't love, not yet. It was the quiet recognition that something pure had looked at me and not turned away. That kind of mercy unsettles a man who's spent his life living in shadow. Still, I returned to my routines. The world doesn't slow down for sentiment. My men moved shipments through the port. The accountants handled the numbers, and I played the part of the unshakable Dawn. But every night, when the world emptied out, and I stood before the glass walls of my mansion, I thought of her face in the sunlight. A week later, the Marcellis called again. Another meeting, they said, an opportunity. I should have known opportunities in my world never come without blood. When I arrived, Don Marcelli greeted me with that same false warmth. His vineyard was a sanctuary built on graves. He spoke of alliances, of peace, of blending empires. I listened, measured his tone, and understood his real intention. Submission dressed as negotiation. Then he mentioned a debt. There was a man who had betrayed both our families, he said, a broker who had stolen from their accounts and vanished under my protection. He wanted that man's life as payment for the alliance. The irony didn't escape me. The man he spoke of was already dead. I'd ordered it myself months ago, so I nodded. The debt will be settled, I said, even though it already was. That lie sealed everything that followed. Later that evening, when I left the meeting, Elena stepped outside. She was carrying a basket of wine bottles, her hair pulled back loosely, strands catching the wind. I paused, uncertain whether to speak or just watch. Then she turned, and our eyes met again. There was something different this time. Not curiosity, but recognition. "You're not like them," she said softly. "You don't look at people the way they do." I didn't know what she meant. I wanted to tell her that she was wrong, that I was worse than all of them. but the words stayed trapped in my throat. She smiled, small and genuine, before walking away. That smile followed me back to Naples. Over the next weeks, our worlds began to circle each other. She appeared at every negotiation, silent at her father's side, always observing. I told myself it was nothing, that I could admire her from distance, that men like me didn't get to want. But temptation grows quietly, like ivy through cracks in stone. One night she called. I still don't know how she got my number. Her voice was trembling. There had been a break-in at her family's villa, shots fired, and she was alone. Without thinking, I sent men to secure the place. I went myself. When I arrived, I found her sitting on the marble steps, barefoot, a cut on her arm glistening under the moonlight. She looked up at me, not afraid, just tired. I took off my coat and wrapped it around her shoulders. She didn't thank me. She didn't need to. In that silence, something shifted. I knew it was the beginning of the end. After that night, I saw her more often. Sometimes by accident, sometimes not. We'd meet at the old chapel overlooking the sea, an abandoned stone ruin that had once belonged to a priest who disappeared during the old wars. She said she liked it there because it was quiet, because the world couldn't reach her. We never spoke about her father or mine. We spoke about the sea, about books, about the small things that made her feel alive. For her, it was painting. For me, it was silence. But I could feel the walls closing in. Every day, Luca would bring me reports. Strange movements in the south, whispers that Don Marcelli was plotting something more than peace. I ignored them. I told myself I didn't care. That was my first mistake. Then came the real debt. One night, Father Leone came to my mansion. He was an old friend of my mother's, one of the few who dared to speak to me without fear. He carried a thin folder in his hands. "There's something you need to see," he said. His voice was low, burdened. Inside the folder was a single document, an order for assassination, signed by Don Marcelli. My name was written at the top. The signature at the bottom was familiar, Elena's. My pulse went still. The priest looked at me with pity, not surprise. She didn't know what she was signing. Her father handles everything through her. "She's his notary," I said nothing. Father Leone sighed. "You can still walk away, Adrian. You've built an empire. Don't burn it for one person." But he didn't understand. I'd already burned everything long before her. The only thing left was her face, and the impossible hope that she might see something worth saving in me. 2 days later, Luca brought news that changed everything. Don Marcelli was planning to eliminate my closest lieutenants and take over the docks. A message was sent to remind me that our alliance depended on my cooperation. That message came with a single demand. I was to kill the traitor who had once betrayed him, the same ghost I'd already buried. When I refused, they named another target, myself. That's when I realized the debt he wanted wasn't just business. It was bloodline vengeance, a settling of ghosts between our fathers. And Elena, unknowingly, was the bridge he was using to reach me. I remember the night I decided what to do. The sea was calm, the air thick with the smell of rain. I looked out at the water and thought of her, the way her hands trembled when she held a brush, the way she looked at the sky as if she was listening to it breathe. I told Luca, "If they come for me, they'll find hell waiting." He nodded, silent as always. But deep down, I knew that hell had already found me. Because the moment I fell in love with Elena Marcelli, I'd signed my own death warrant, and I wasn't sure I wanted to escape it. I used to think guilt was a noise, a scream buried somewhere beneath the skin. But when I met Elena, I learned it's quieter than that. It's the sound of her laughter echoing through rooms where I've hidden too many bodies. It's the way her hand brushed mine and made me forget every reason I ever thought I needed to be ruthless. Love doesn't arrive like thunder. It seeps in like fog, soft, steady, impossible to fight. The nights after the betrayal unfolded like a slow fever. I couldn't stop thinking of her, even when every instinct told me I should. She wasn't safe with me. None of this was safe. But I kept finding excuses to see her. A business meeting near her gallery. A storm that cut the roads and forced me to stay. Each time I told myself it would be the last. It never was. She had a small studio above the cliffs, where the air smelled of salt and turpentine. Paintings leaned against every wall, oceans, storms, fragments of light trapped on canvas. When she painted, she forgot the world. She once told me that color was her way of praying. I remember standing there, watching her brush move across the canvas, and realizing how empty my life had been without gentleness. For the first time, the silence inside me didn't feel like control. It felt like absence. One evening, she asked me why I always looked at the horizon. "Because it's the only thing I can't own," I said. She smiled sadly. "Maybe you're not meant to own it. Maybe you're meant to forgive it. Forgive." The word stung. Forgiveness was something I had long buried under the weight of necessity. I didn't know how to forgive anyone, least of all myself, but her presence began to change me in ways I couldn't name. I stopped attending certain meetings. I let enemies live who would have been buried without a thought a year ago. Luca noticed first. He didn't say it aloud, but I could see it in his eyes. The fear that I was becoming weak. He was right. Love makes men dangerous, but not in the way people think. It isn't the fear of losing power. It's the fear of losing what finally makes you human. The more time I spent with Elena, the more I began to feel the edges of my old life closing in. My men whispered. Rivals tested boundaries. Even my reflection seemed to accuse me, a man pretending to be worthy of softness, while his hands were still stained with the past. One night, I found her painting something different. A man standing in the rain, his face half shadowed. Behind him, the ocean burned gold with dawn. "Who is he?" I asked. She hesitated. "Someone who doesn't know how to be forgiven." I didn't ask more. I didn't need to. After that, I started dreaming again. Dreams I hadn't had since I was a boy. My mother's voice, the rosary in her hands, her whisper that mercy wasn't for the pure, but for the broken who dared to seek it. I began visiting the chapel where Elena liked to sit. Alone sometimes. I didn't pray. I didn't know how anymore. I just sat there in the dark, listening to the echoes. The stone walls held centuries of repentance, and for the first time, I wanted to add my voice to it. But every moment of peace came with a shadow. I couldn't forget the document with her signature. The order for my death. She didn't know, but knowledge doesn't change truth. I started keeping distance. Fewer calls, fewer visits. But the more I tried to pull away, the more she found me. She'd appear at my door with no reason at all, carrying a painting or a bottle of wine, smiling like the world wasn't on fire. One night, the storm came back. Rain hammered the glass walls of the mansion. I was in my office staring at an old photograph of my mother when the door opened. Elena stood there, soaked from the rain, trembling. "I needed to see you," she whispered. Her voice was fragile, almost breaking. I wanted to tell her to leave, to save herself from the ruin I carried, but I couldn't. She stepped closer, her fingers tracing the rosary that hung from my wrist. "Do you ever regret it?" she asked. "Every day," I said. The air between us went still. Then she did something I wasn't ready for. She kissed me. It wasn't passion, it was mercy. In that moment, I felt everything. The years of silence, the violence, the loneliness, all of it unraveling. For one heartbeat, I believed I could be someone else. But guilt has a way of surviving even tenderness. When she fell asleep in my arms that night, I couldn't close my eyes. The storm outside raged, lightning flashing across the sea, and I realized I was living inside my own confession. I loved her, and because of that, I would destroy her. When dawn came, I left the bed quietly. Luca was waiting in the hall. He didn't ask questions. He didn't need to. "Pull everyone from the docks," I told him. "No one moves until I say," he frowned. "You think they're coming?" "I know they are." He nodded once, eyes cold with understanding. "And her?" I looked back toward the room where she still slept. The early light touched her face, soft and unknowing. "She's not part of this," I said. But even as I spoke, I knew the lie in my words. No one touches a wolf without learning the cost of its teeth. I walked to the balcony, watching the sunrise burn through the mist. The light was too pure for the kind of man I was. It reminded me of all the things I could never have without tainting them. And yet, in that moment, I whispered a promise to no one in particular. Maybe to her, Maybe to God, maybe to the ghost of mercy that haunted my mother's voice. I said, if I can't live clean, then let me at least die honest. I didn't know then that the wish was already coming true. War doesn't arrive with a trumpet. It slips under doors as rumor, stains the tongue as a taste of metal, and wakes you at 3 a.m. with the sudden conviction that your name is being spoken by men who hate you. It began at the docks, as all our stories did, where Salt married Diesel and the gulls learned to scream over gunfire. I had pulled our people back, tightened roots, ghosted our schedules. Still men fell. A lookout disappeared between warehouses. His body surfaced later, the rope still around his wrists, seaweed braided through his hair like a funeral crown. 2 nights after that, a shipment burned so hot, the flames wrote a sermon against the midnight sky. The fire department arrived to find the hydrants dry. Someone had seen to that. Someone close. I knew the shape of betrayal by its footprint. It stepped exactly where you trusted it not to. Luca brought me names. That was his mercy. He didn't bring me doubts, only things he could swear his soul against. They're buying your lieutenants with promises of clean money, he said. New names. New lives. The kind that come with gardens and small dogs. He tried to smile after he said it, but his mouth never learned how. I watched him from the balcony, the dawn lifting a bruised light off the water, and I understood how tired he was of carnage dressed as purpose. I told him we'd cut rot before it spread. He nodded once and walked out to do the work. But the wound didn't come from the side. It came from the blood. My father's old men, the ones who stayed when I took the throne, had kept their coffins open and their consciences shut. They remembered a different theology. The Lord your God is leverage. The only heaven is a room where your enemies drown on dry land. They whispered that I had grown soft, that a woman's hand had turned my empire into a chapel of apologies. They weren't wrong about the hand. They were wrong about the softness. Loving Elena hadn't made me weaker. It had made surrender an option I could recognize. And once you know surrender exists, power stops being a god and becomes a question. Men who only know one prayer cannot stand a question. The first true message arrived on a Thursday, the air heavy with rain that didn't fall. A black sedan stalled at the roundabout above my cliffs. A boy hopped out, no older than 15, and tied a linen parcel to my gate with red thread. He didn't look back. He ran like innocence on fire. Inside the parcel was a painting canvas, slashed twice across the center. Elena's signature in the corner. The image was of a sea at dawn. The longest cut ran through the horizon line until light and water bled together. Below the canvas, a note in a neat hand. Pay what your father owes. I stood there a long while, feeling the old rage crawl out of its grave. It moved in my bones like a forgotten language. When it speaks, you remember exactly how to answer. By nightfall, my men had the sender, an errand lieutenant with breath that smelled of church wine and fear. He confessed within minutes. The Marcelli were calling in a debt older than my mother's grave. It wasn't money, it was legacy. They wanted the coast unified under their blessing, with me as a kneeling ornament or a memory. The old handshake under all of it was bloodline arithmetic. Your father killed mine's brother. Mine helped kill your mother. History kept no secrets. It only misplaced receipts. I gave the boy a car and a new name and told him to vanish. You don't win a war by breaking more children. The next morning, the sky finally broke. Rain moved sideways across the sea like regret with teeth. I wore the rosary at my wrist and stepped into the chapel Elena loved because I needed a roof that remembered the weight of vows. The stone was dark, the air ascetic with damp. I sat where she sat, in the third pew where the wood had a smooth hollow worn by small prayers. I didn't ask for victory. I asked for a way to fight without losing the last clean thing left in me. The answer, like all true answers, came with a cost. They took her. It was precise, almost surgical. Elena left the gallery early to visit the vineyard, a detour her father had arranged, and a van pulled from the orchard road the way a shark tilts toward the rib cage. No gunshots, no screaming. By the time a field hand noticed the dust, she was already a ghost inside someone else's night. I learned about it from Father Leone. He called me through the rainfall, his voice a small lantern in a storm. Adrian, he said, the girl is gone. He didn't say her name. Maybe he thought if he kept it unspoken, the heavens would mishear and leave her untouched. I didn't answer. I simply walked out into the rain, let it soak my suit, and told Luca to gather the maps. Men who say they don't negotiate with terror seldom love anyone. I loved. I would negotiate with hell. Marcelli waited exactly 24 hours. The message arrived by courier, paper in a white envelope, cruel in its cleanliness. Bring me the docs. Bring me your head of accounts. Bring me the oath your father refused to take. Or bring me your grief. He signed it like a wedding invitation. I poured a drink I didn't taste, and stared at the letter until the ink learned my name. Luca tracked the van to a factory on the southern edge of the river, a place where they cured leather and baptized sin. The building had high windows and a belly full of hooks. It used to bind animal skins into shoes. It now bound men into objects. We go tonight, he said. I shook my head. We go now. The rain made everything a mirror. We drove without headlights, our cars cutting quiet wakes along streets that smelled of iron and old thunder. I carried no saint except memory. My mother's rosary warmed against my skin as if remembering hands. Inside the factory, the lights were too bright. Violence prefers confession booths to floodlights, but they'd chosen spectacle. Intent looks different when it wants to be seen. She sat in a chair under a hanging bulb, wrists bound in linen like an altar offering. A bruise darkened her cheekbone like a fingertip pressed into wet paint. She looked at me as if the world hadn't ended. That is love's strangest miracle. It refuses evidence. Marcelli stepped out of the shadow between machines wearing a suit the color of apology. You kept my daughter busy with your confessions, he said, and for the first time, I heard his voice without its choir. It was small. Now you'll keep your end of the family prayer. I didn't answer. I watched Elena breathe and counted each breath as if it might be her last, and I could argue with God by learning the numbers. He told me the terms again, each word a bead on a different rosary. Docs, accounts, oath. I could have agreed. I could have surrendered the geography of my sin to spare the woman who taught me mercy, but my surrender would not free her. It would only replace one cage with another, mine with his. Love without freedom isn't love at all. The sentence moved through me like a bell. I'll burn it, I said. The docs, the books, the oath. I'll salt the ground so no God can grow there again. I stepped closer to the light, but you don't get to own what I destroy. His smile died. He gestured, and men raised guns in choreography. Luca's men answered with the same grim ballet. All the metal in the room learned our names at once. I don't know who fired first. I know only the sound, a thunder so intimate it felt like being held by a storm. I moved without thought, a body remembering the mathematics of survival. I drove my shoulder into the nearest man, took his weapon before he remembered his hands, and aimed for knees and wrists, the places that drop a man back into his boyhood. Luca moved like grief with knives. We didn't kill more than we had to. We killed exactly enough to keep the blood from reaching her feet. Elena didn't scream. She watched me like an answer she had expected and feared. When the smoke settled into something like air, Marcelli stood alone near the window, one hand on the sill, rain whitening his knuckles. He looked old enough to have learned forgiveness and proud enough to refuse it. He raised a pistol in a slow arc toward my chest as if he were lifting a chalice. I could have shot him. I didn't. I stepped between the muzzle and Elena. If he fired, the bullet would pass through the only thing I still believed in, and enter the only heart left that knew my name. That calculus made cowards of all reasons. Don't, I said, but it wasn't a command. It was a prayer. A sound split the room, metal on concrete, abrupt as regret. The pistol had fallen from his hand. Luca had stepped behind him without footstep. The knife at his throat, a thin line of winter. Marcelli breathed once like a man trying to outrun his own lungs. Say it, Luca whispered. Say you're finished. He meant it for me as much as for the old man. He was giving me a door out of a murder that would stain generations. I looked at Elena. Rain braided through the high windows and laid its cold fingers on her hair. She met my eyes and made no plea. In that silence, I heard all the men I had ever sent into dark rooms. I heard my mother's rosary clicking like a clock. I heard the sea and its indifferent hymn. Let him live, I said. Luca's jaw moved once, a clench against instinct, and then his knife fell away. Mercy isn't a feeling. It's a blade turned inward. We left with Elena between us, the linen unwinding from her wrists like surrender changing its mind. Outside, the rain had gentled. The city looked rinsed but not forgiven. Back at the mansion, I led her to the room with the window over the sea. She stood there, arms folded against a shiver that wasn't from the weather, and stared at the water as if it might return something it had taken. "I won't let them touch you," I said. The sentence felt too small. Protection is a promise you make when you don't know the future but want to feel taller than it. She turned, and the bruise on her cheek caught the lightning like an accusation. I touched the edge of it with a reverence that hurt. In the hall, Luca waited, rain dripping from his coat. His eyes asked a question he didn't voice. "What kind of war is this if we spare the king?" "The kind that ends," I said. He nodded, the movement a slow surrender. "Then we end it," he answered, and for the first time since the vineyard, I believed we might end something besides ourselves. But sleep didn't follow. The storm moved out to sea and kept its vigil. I sat at the desk with my mother's rosary unspooled beside the letter that had demanded my obedience. I cut the letter into strips with a knife meant for bread. The pieces looked like tiny flags without a country. I understood the cost now. Mercy would not save my empire. It would unmake it. Men who only understand fear will not serve a hand that refuses to close. They would leave, or they would try to finish what they started at the docks. So be it. If love could not be clean, then my death might be. And if forgiveness needed a pyre, I would build it with the only wood I had left. My name. The sea breathed. The house listened. Dawn, somewhere beyond the clouds, practiced its light. The war had entered its last chapter, and for the first time in my life, I knew how to write an ending that didn't make a god of control. Morning came pale and clean, like a promise the world didn't know how to keep. The storm had moved out to sea and left the air washed thin, the way a chapel smells after too many candles. Elena slept for a few hours while the house breathed around her, while Luca posted men along the cliffs and quieted the phones. I watched the horizon practice its light and felt time pulling me toward a door I had locked for years. You cannot protect someone with a lie. You can only surround them with a softer kind of danger. When she woke, her bruised cheek had taken on the color of fading rain. She touched it in the mirror and didn't flinch. Strength in her was never loud. It moved like tidewater, a patience with edges. "I want to go to the chapel," she said, "the one over the sea." I told her I'd bring the car around. Luca looked at me for one heartbeat too long, then nodded and vanished down the hall with the obedience of a man who collects your debts even when they are against heaven. On the drive, the coast unrolled in blue-gray. The vineyard hills wore their after-rain sheen, leaves polished, earth dark and grateful. Elena kept her hands folded in her lap, as if guarding a small bird I could not see. The rosary wrapped my wrist, bead warmth against pulse. My mother used to say the cross isn't a sword to swing at others. It's a door you carry so you can learn to walk out of yourself. I had never found the hinge. We reached the chapel near noon. The wind stroked the old stones, gentle as a healer. Inside, the light fell from a high, narrow window, a blade that did not wound. Dust drifted like slow-thinking snow. She went to the third pew, her pew, and rested her fingers in the hollow worn by other hands, other pleas. I stood in the aisle with my grief like a second man beside me. I thought of all the ways truth could break a thing that had only just begun to live. Then I thought of what lies do to the living. They dress them as survivors while stealing their breath. "I have something to tell you," I said. She looked up, the sky trapped in her eyes. "I know." Father Leone appeared then, slip quiet from the sacristy doorway, as if the chapel had made him the way the sea makes salt. His face carried that permanent fatigue of men who keep watch over combustions and call it shepherding. He held a thin folder, the edges gone soft from being touched by too many doubts. "You asked me once for truth," he said to me. "It will not be less true today." He placed the folder on the pew between us, a neutral country we could both reach without violence, and stepped back to the shadows as if the light itself were confession. I didn't open it. I didn't need paper to tell me the shape of my own hands. "Elena," I said. "Years ago, after my mother was killed, I went hunting for a ledger that didn't exist. the one that balances blood. The night I found your family's enforcer, the one who opened the door that let death into our house, I found something else. I found a son at his side, not a child, a man with a gun who had his father's stance and his history's eyes. She didn't move. Even her breath learned stillness. I shot the father first, I said. Your father's enforcer. And when the son raised his weapon, I fired again. The window light shifted. Dust burned gold. He was your brother. The word did not echo. It landed between us without ceremony and began its work. Her fingers, those patient, paint-sure fingers, closed around the folder as if truth required a handle. She opened it with the care of someone lifting a veil from the face of a wounded sleeper. Inside lay photographs with the color gone, dates in the corner, police copy signatures, a newspaper clipping with the headline trimmed away, my name not printed but present, there in the angle of a shadow, the report of a bullet, the arithmetic of revenge. Father Leone had gathered what the world had tried to forget, so that forgiveness would have something to answer. She did not cry. Tears are not the only water that breaks a life open. She scanned the images once, then placed the folder back down as gently as if returning a chalice. How old? She asked. 23, I said. Matteo. She closed her eyes. When she opened them, the light had changed. A new weather moved through her gaze. Not storm, not dawn. Something stranger, a season I had no word for. My father never told me, she said. He said Matteo died in a crossfire. He said it was the price of honor. He said revenge would make a better home than grief. I stood very still. When you carry a weapon all your life, there are postures that feel like prayer only because they are the only stillness you know. He would have killed me that night, I said. I believe that. I still do, but belief doesn't bury the dead any gentler. The rosary beads knocked softly against my wrist bone, a small clock. I kept the ledger in my head and called it justice. I could not count your brother into mercy because I had not learned the numbers. The chapel held us without comment. Wind braided its low hymn through a crack beneath the door. Somewhere inside the stone centuries exhaled, Elena stood, not abruptly. Grace rarely is. She looked up at the crucifix above the altar, the wood darkened by smoke and touch, the figure worn smooth by petitioning palms, and stepped toward it the way one steps toward a shoreline with no map. She reached out and laid the flat of her hand against the wood just under the nailed feet. I painted a man in the rain, she said. I thought he was a stranger I was trying to forgive, but it was always you. She turned, and there was no hatred in her face, only a sorrow that had learned how to stand. You saved me last night. You spared my father when it would have been easier to end him. And years ago you killed my brother because another man had already taken your mother. What does a heart do with a world like this, Adrian? It breaks, I said. And if it's lucky, it breaks open. She looked at me for a long time. The silence between us felt like the space inside a seed, pressure, darkness, instruction. Then she walked past me down the aisle, slow, deliberate, the way truth leaves a room when it refuses to slam the door. At the threshold, she stopped and turned her head just enough for the light to gather along her jaw. I can't carry you in this, she said. Not today. I wanted to ask her to stay. I wanted to offer the smallness of my promises as if they could be a roof for a weather this large. But the first mercy love learns is not to beg. I bowed instead. Not because I am holy, but because I had run out of weapons that did not harm us both. She stepped into the wind. The sea received her as it receives everything, not cruel, not kind, simply immense. I watched her make her way along the cliff path until the stone curve took her from sight. Father Leone approached with the sound of linen. He stood beside me in the aisle and studied the empty doorway, as if the shape of it could teach him how to bless what leaving means. You told her, he said. I told her what I did, not what I am. Sometimes those are the same, he answered. Sometimes they must be different so that tomorrow has a place to stand. I nodded. The beads clicked once more, a tiny verdict. If she doesn't come back, I said, keep her safe. Keep the chapel open. His hand touched my shoulder, a benediction without words. Safety is a brittle god, he said, but I will keep the door. On the walk back to the car, the sky decided to be blue. The kind of impossible blue that makes you think of forgiveness, even if you don't know her face. I understood then that love had moved into a different room. Not gone, only quiet, learning a new grammar. I also understood what the men on the cliffs would do when they learned mercy was the house rule. They would test the foundations, then strike at night and call it righteousness. I drove without remembering the road. The mansion rose from the rock like a verdict. Luca met me on the terrace, eyes narrowing at the new weather he read in my expression. "She knows," he said. "She does." He studied the horizon the way wolves study tree lines. "Does she stay?" "Not today." He breathed through his nose, a slow release of a war he'd been holding since the docks. "Then we work as if there is no later." He handed me a key card and a folded ledger. I pulled the accounts into clean rooms. If they take the docks, they won't take the names. "I'll move the families tonight." "Move them all," I said. "Even the ones who sold us for gardens and dogs." He didn't question me. There are orders that sound like a man talking to himself in a mirror. Luca had learned to obey those first. When he left, I went to my office and opened the safe. Inside lay the objects that had survived my conversion. A watch that had belonged to my father, a photograph of my mother in a dress the color of dusk, and a small velvet pouch I had not touched in years. I poured the pouch onto the desk. A ring slid out, matte gold, nicked by time, the interior engraved with a single name, Matteo. I had taken it the night rage taught me how to calculate, not as a trophy, but as evidence the algebra had been solved. I carried the ring to the balcony and held it up to the afternoon light until it haloed. Then I set it on the railing and watched the sea for a long while, listening to the quiet where her voice had been. Finally, I closed my fingers around the metal and put it back in the pouch. Forgiveness is not forgetting. It is memory baptized. As the sun leaned toward evening, the wind shifted. It came off the water with that chill Naples knows so well, the one that warns of visitors who do not knock. Below the cliff, a black car took the turn too carefully. Another followed a minute later and parked where the road bends to pretend it is a path. No gulls cried. The house seemed to hold its breath. The truth had done what truth always does. It had emptied the room of illusions and left space for whatever would come next. I wrapped the rosary twice around my wrist. The cross lay against the pulse, cool as a verdict, light as a key. I thought of Elena's hand on the chapel wood, of her question about what a heart does with a world like this. I stepped back inside and turned off the lights. If I could not keep love beside me, I could keep the path to it clear. If I could not outrun what I had destroyed, I could at least decide where the last fire would burn. And if there was any dawn left for me, it would not arrive as reward. It would come the way all true dawns come, after a night chosen, not survived. Night descended without hesitation. The sky had the color of wet iron, and the sea below the cliffs was a restless heart, black and silver where the moon's reflection trembled. I watched it from the balcony until I could no longer tell where the water ended and the wind began. Everything felt uncertain now. The borders of my world, the boundaries between love and guilt, even the line that once defined who I was. Elena was gone. She hadn't said goodbye, but her absence had its own gravity, pulling at every corner of the house. Rooms that had once felt enormous now breathed like wounds, tight, aching, echoing her footsteps even when the air stood still. For years I'd built walls of power to keep the world out. But now, with her gone, those walls felt like a prison collapsing inward. Luca found me there, still watching the sea. He didn't speak for a while. He never rushed silence. When he finally did, his voice carried that weight that comes when men begin to realize the war they're fighting isn't outside themselves. "They'll strike soon," he said. "The Martellis lost too much face at the factory. They'll want blood, and they'll want yours first." I nodded. "Let them come." He stepped forward, anger tightening his words. "You think dying fixes anything? You think it'll make her forgive you?" I looked at him. My oldest friend, my shadow in every room I'd ever entered, and saw fear. Not for his life, but for the meaning of everything we'd done together. "No," I said quietly, "but it might stop the rest of this from spreading." He cursed under his breath, pacing the balcony. "You used to be smarter than that." "I used to be colder," I replied. "That's not the same thing." He turned away, defeated, and for the first time in years, I felt the ache of friendship. The kind that doesn't need loyalty, just understanding. After he left, I stood there until dawn began to bleed across the horizon. The first light touched the ocean, and I thought of Elena's words in the chapel. What does a heart do with a world like this? It learns to let go. By the time the sun had risen, my decision was made. I would end this war, not by winning, but by refusing to play its game. That afternoon, I called a meeting of all my lieutenants, men who had followed me out of fear, out of respect, or simply because they didn't know another way to survive. They filled the long marble room, suits dark as funeral cloth, faces hardened by years of violence disguised as business. I stood at the head of the table. The rosary hung from my wrist, half hidden under my cuff. I built this empire for control, I began, to prove I could bend chaos into order, and I succeeded. But the cost was everything that ever meant anything. Murmurs stirred. They weren't used to speeches about meaning. There's no peace left to buy, I continued. No loyalty left to earn. So today I'm dissolving it. All of it. Confusion rippled across the table. Then outrage. One man, Vieri, a loyal soldier of my father's generation, slammed his fist down. You can't walk away from this, he barked. This family was built on your name. You think Marcelli will let us live in peace if you drop your guns? I don't expect peace, I said. Only an ending. The room erupted. Shouts, accusations, disbelief. For a moment, I thought they might turn on me then and there. But Luca's presence behind me was enough to hold them still. When the noise subsided, I spoke again. Softer now, almost a whisper. If they come for me, you leave. Take your families, take the money I've hidden under their names. Walk away from this city and never look back, Vieri sneered. You think dying makes you a saint? I met his eyes. No, it makes me responsible. He opened his mouth again, but Luca's hand found his shoulder. The message was clear. The meeting ended in silence. One by one, they left, their footsteps fading like ghosts exiting a stage. When the door closed, Luca turned to me. You really mean to do this? I do. He studied me, then exhaled. Slow, reluctant acceptance. Then I'll make sure no one touches her. Elena? He nodded. I found where she's been staying. The old Marcelli villa by the vineyards. She hasn't left in days. A pulse of relief and dread moved through me. Does she know they're coming? She doesn't believe they dare. She's wrong. He met my gaze. So what do we do? I tightened the rosary around my wrist. We save her. Whatever happens after, it ends tonight. Dusk fell like a curtain. The road to the villa cut through the hills, gold with dying light. I drove with Luca beside me, the car gliding through shadows that felt like old sins stretching toward their conclusion. By the time we reached the gates, the air had gone still. Too still. No guards, no dogs. The world had gone silent in that peculiar way it does before violence erupts. Inside, the house smelled of dust and old flowers. The echo of footsteps followed us up the marble stairs. In the parlor, I found her painting again. The same sea, the same man in the rain. But now the horizon line was complete. No slash, no wound. Just light, Elena? I called softly. She appeared from the far end of the corridor, wrapped in a shawl, her expression unreadable. You shouldn't be here, she said. Neither should they, I replied. A flicker of fear crossed her face. They're coming? Yes, then go. Please, Adrian. If you stay, you'll only... A gunshot cracked through the night before she could finish. Glass shattered behind us. The storm had come early. I pulled her down as another shot tore through the wall. Luca was already at the window, firing back. Shadows moved outside, half a dozen, maybe more. They'd chosen the vineyard as cover. Elena, I whispered, listen to me. You need to run. I'm not leaving you again. You have to. She shook her head, eyes bright with the same quiet defiance that had undone me from the start. Luca shouted from the window. Back exit's clear. I'll hold them off. I grabbed her hand, pulling her toward the kitchen. The rosary bit into my palm. Every step echoed like a clock counting down. We reached the back door, a narrow path leading toward the cliffs. But before I could open it, a figure stepped from the shadows. Vieri. His suit was torn, his face wet with sweat and rain. "You betrayed us," he hissed. "You think mercy saves you?" He raised his gun. I moved faster. The shot went wide, the sound ricocheting through stone and night. I slammed into him, the struggle short, brutal, final. When the gun went off again, he fell, his blood darkening the tiles. Elena stood frozen, staring at me. Not in horror, in understanding. "You'll never escape this," she whispered. "I don't want to," I said. "I just want you safe." Outside, engines roared. The vineyard burned with headlights. Luca's voice rang out over the chaos. "Go! Now!" I pulled Elena into the storm, down the path toward the cliffs. Wind tore at our clothes, rain slicing sideways. The sea below raged like something alive. When we reached the edge, I stopped. The world had narrowed to thunder and breath. She turned to me, tears lost in the rain. "You can't stay." "I can't leave." She shook her head, but before she could speak, I pressed the rosary into her palm. "Take this. If I don't come back, keep it clean. Adrian, go." She hesitated for one heartbeat. Just one. Then ran into the darkness. The cross clenched against her chest. I turned back toward the lights of the approaching cars, toward the sound of the past refusing to die. If mercy had a price, I was ready to pay it in full. The cliffs remember everything. The wind, the footsteps, the screams that dissolve into salt. Every stone there has learned how to keep secrets without judgment. That night, they learned one more. The rain was relentless, turning the earth into a black mirror that swallowed light. Headlights carved through it like knives. 3 cars, engines growling, each carrying the ghosts of choices I had already made. Luca was still at the villa, holding the line as long as one man could. I had told him not to follow, but he was too loyal for obedience. If he was still alive, I hoped he'd understand what I meant to do. I walked back up from the edge of the cliff to meet them, the sound of the sea chasing me like a pulse. My coat clung heavy to my skin, water dripped from my hair, each drop counting seconds that didn't belong to me anymore. The first car stopped 20 meters away. Doors opened. Men spilled out, Marcelli's soldiers, the same faces that had haunted my family for generations. A 4th door opened slower. Don Marcelli stepped out, wrapped in a black coat, his face lit from below by the dim orange of a lighter. He lit a cigarette, inhaled, and studied me through the rain. "So this is how you end it," he said, his voice cracked with cold and pride. "Standing alone, like a dog that's forgotten its pack." I smiled faintly. Maybe the dog learned it didn't need a pack to stop the hunt. He laughed, a brittle sound, sharp enough to cut the air. "You think this is redemption? You burned the docks, killed my men, ruined everything our fathers built. And for what? A woman? Love doesn't wash blood, Adrian. I know," I said. "It just keeps you from drowning in it." He flicked the cigarette into the mud and nodded to his men. Guns lifted. Rain hissed against metal. I didn't move. The sea roared below, close enough that I could feel its breath. "Elena's gone," I said. "You'll never touch her again." Marcelli's eyes narrowed. "You think I need to? You took from me the only son I had left. You think mercy lives in me after that?" "I don't need your mercy," I said. "Just your silence." He hesitated. Maybe it was the look in my eyes. Maybe he saw something he hadn't expected. Not fear, not defiance, but peace. "Do it," he said finally. But before the shots came, another sound tore through the storm, a car engine screaming up the hill. Tires slid across the wet stone, brakes screamed, and a dark figure stepped out. Luca. His coat was half burned, his shirt soaked crimson at the side, but his eyes were alive, fierce, wild. "Adrian!" He shouted, "Down!" Gunfire exploded. The night shattered. Muzzles flashed like lightning, short, merciless bursts. Luca fired from the hip. 2 men dropped, their bodies folding into the mud. I ducked behind a rock as bullets chewed through the rain. The air smelled of iron and fire. My ears rang. I could taste the copper tang of blood in the back of my throat. When I looked up, Luca was already hit again. Chest, shoulder. He staggered, still shooting, his face pale but his grin alive. Go, he shouted. End it. I stood and moved forward. 1 step, 2. Every shot that passed by felt like time trying to pull me back. But I kept going until I was close enough to see Marcelli's eyes. That cold, ancient blue that held all the hatred of generations. He aimed his pistol, hand trembling. You should have stayed a monster, he said. I stepped closer, until the barrel pressed against my chest. Maybe, I said, but monsters don't get to love. And I did. He hesitated. Just a second, but it was enough. I reached up, grabbed the gun, twisted it downward. It fired once. The shot slammed through my side, hot and deep. Pain exploded like light behind my eyes. I drove my other hand against his chest, shoving him backward. He fell, hard, the gun skittering into the mud. I dropped to one knee. The world spun. The rain felt heavier now, almost kind, washing the blood down my fingers. Marcelli crawled toward the gun, but Luca was faster. He stepped forward, limping, aimed his weapon, and stopped. His hand shook. He's done, I whispered. Let it end. For the first time in years, Luca disobeyed me. He lowered the gun and dropped it. Then end it yourself. I looked at the sea. The edge of the cliff glowed faintly with the reflection of lightning. The storm was moving inland now, pulling the light with it. Behind me, Marcelli coughed, blood mixing with rain. You think she'll forgive you? He rasped. I don't need forgiveness, I said softly. Just peace. I stumbled to my feet, every breath a blade. I walked past him toward the edge. My legs barely remembered how to hold me, but the sea was close now. The sound of it vast, endless, final. The rosary was gone from my wrist. Then I remembered. Elena had it. That felt right. Luca shouted my name once more, but his voice was fading under the wind. I turned back one last time. He was on his knees, watching me with tears he'd never admit were his. Tell her, I said. Tell her I kept my promise. Then I stepped forward. The drop wasn't long. The sea rose to meet me like an old friend, cold and infinite. For a moment I thought I saw light beneath the surface. Gold, warm, almost merciful. Maybe it was dawn. Maybe it was her. And then, silence. The world exhaled. The sea was calm the morning they found him. Fishermen saw the coat first. Dark fabric caught on the rocks, rising and falling with the tide like something that refused to let go. The current had carried him to the small cove below the chapel. It was fitting, almost merciful, as if the ocean itself had chosen the place of his forgiveness. I came when Father Leone called. The world around me felt muted, soundless, as though grief had swallowed the wind. I stood at the edge of the cliff, looking down at the water where they had laid him. Adrian Vale, the man who taught me that even monsters can pray if they bleed long enough. In his pocket, they found a letter sealed in wax. My name was written across it not as plea but as confession. The paper was soaked at the edges, the ink running in places, but I could still read every word. Elena, if you are reading this, then I have done what I always feared most. I have left something unfinished. There is no absolution in dying, but maybe there is honesty. You once asked what a heart does with a world like this. I think I know now. It forgives what it can, and it leaves the rest to the sea. I loved you in a way I didn't know men like me could love, not to possess, but to understand. You showed me that mercy isn't a gift. It's a choice, and I made mine. If you ever come back to the chapel, look to the third pew. Beneath it, there's a small box. Inside, you'll find the ring and the rest of the ledger. Burn them. Let what we were become light. Tell Luca I kept my word. Tell God I tried. I went to the chapel that evening, carrying the rosary he had pressed into my hand. The sun was setting, the light warm and gold, the kind of color that makes every loss look momentarily holy. I found the small box beneath the pew, just as he said, and I burned the ledger. The flames whispered through the paper like rain through leaves. When it was done, I placed the rosary on the altar and whispered a single prayer, not for his soul, but for his peace. Outside, the horizon opened in quiet gold. Dawn, finally. If this story touched you, share it with someone who still believes in second chances. Sometimes silence is how the soul learns to speak.